If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach for ending binge eating. I'm Katherine Hansen, your host, and I'm so happy to be here for another show. This is the 5th Recovery Stories episode, and there is still one more to come. I'd actually love to do more recovery stories down the road. I have received so much positive feedback from people saying they could relate to the stories of each person and have found comfort and inspiration in them. As I say often on this show, everyone's story is unique, and that's something I want you to keep in mind as you listen to this episode or any of the other Recovery Stories episodes. I think this applies the most in the area of how people end up eating during and after recovery. Some of the people in these episodes have mentioned ways of eating that work for them, which is wonderful, but also be aware that your way of eating may end up completely different, and that's perfectly okay. Today you'll hear from Joanne, Laurence, and Eileen, who are all on their own unique journey. I know you'll find what they have to say encouraging and helpful. And what's a little unique about this particular episode is that 2 of these women are just coming out of the binge and diet cycle. And I believe they offer a very useful perspective because their struggle and the solutions they've used are so fresh in their minds. So I'll go ahead and share these conversations, and I hope they allow you to feel like you can absolutely take control of this cycle as well. Today we have Joanne here to share her recovery story, and I'm really happy to have you here today.
Great. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of courage to share, what you've been through. And I think this is going to be very inspiring to others because you've struggled with this a long time. I mean, you said you binged for 41 years.
Yes, I remember my first memory of binging when I was 5. I came home from kindergarten and I had always seen it in my house. My mom had binged and then she started binging and purging. But the first time I actually did it, I was 5. I came home from kindergarten on a cold day and I devoured some cupcakes.
Did you kind of know something was wrong at that point? I mean, I know it's far back to remember, or did it just seem normal because that's what your mother was doing?
No, it seemed wrong. I remember distinctively staring at this tray and being like, I'm not hungry, but they're there. And I was definitely bored. Unfortunately, my home life was not the best, but I know that once I started eating, it made me feel better. And so I kept going.
And did it start happening often? Was that sort of throughout your whole childhood?
Yes, I feel like that moment was the starting point. It's like then the gateway was there and I went through it. And throughout my life, it was a constant battle of dieting and just not liking myself for a really, really long time. Even when I was as thin as I could be, or if I was as big as it could be, it's like it didn't matter. There's always this feeling of I'm not good enough. I don't look good. I just don't like myself.
Yeah, your story is different than mine in that it didn't start with a diet. The dieting sort of got mixed in later on. Is that the case?
Yeah, I'd say when I got older into upper elementary, middle school, and then definitely high school, that's when dieting really came predominant. I remember my friends and we would skip lunch in high school because we wanted to be skinny. And looking back, there was nothing wrong with us. I mean, I'm tall. I've always been tall. I shot up pretty early. And so part of me not liking my appearance was just because I was so tall. And then when I had on the extra weight, that made me stand out as well. And to make it even better, my mom was really into home perms. And so she would give me these home perms and my hair was just out. My brothers would tease me and call me Bozo the clown. And I was like, oh my God, thanks guys.
It's such a common thing, I think. You start to get to that age where you're in high school, your friends are dieting. You start to notice your body, you start to be self-conscious. And yeah, I can imagine the dieting only exacerbated the binging problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember like I tried everything. I tried Weight Watchers. I tried just restricting calories. I tried not eating. There was Dexatrim, at
Mhm.
that time, which was sold over the counter. So I would, spend my paychecks on that and just anything I could to get me to feel at ease with myself.
When did you start treatment? Because I know that you said you went to therapy, but it also really wasn't helpful to you as far as, how they explained the binging and really made you feel like it was this deeper issue.
Yeah, and that's why your story really resonated with me because when you shared that you had gone to therapy to talk about your body issues, I had seriously started therapy probably in like my mid to early 20s. And whenever, I mentioned that I was binging or that I just didn't like myself, there was always a reason why, whether it was anxiety or it was depression. And then it was, try this medication. And it's like I was constantly searching for the magic wand. Like, why is it that I feel this way? Why do I want to do that? And I know that the binging is wrong. And how could I let myself do it? What is wrong with me for allowing it to happen? What is wrong with me for binging again when I don't want to?
And I can see how that would be especially compelling for you to think, oh, something's wrong with me because it started so early. Like you could look back and say, wow, I've been doing this since I was a child. So something really must be wrong with me. Was that something, how was your experience as far as overcoming that and realizing that you did have control, like even though the issue was longstanding?
Yeah, I always worried that there was something wrong with me. Mental illness is in my family. And so I just assumed that I would have it, even though I tried really hard. Like that was my goal. I'm like, I'm not going to continue on this cycle of dysfunction. And even though like I was successful from the outside, I graduated high school and I went on to college and, I'm a working professional. Still there was that constant of there's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. Like my biggest secret is this binging and hating myself and going through that cycle. And I'm honestly in the process now of coming out of it. I mean, I spent a good time, probably about like 5, 6 years, living my best life and not living in that cycle. I felt like I had control over it. And then it slowly started to creep up again, and then just one thing led to another. And then I was back into the binging, not liking myself cycle. And then once I read your story, I came across your story through another podcast I was listening to. And like I stopped what I was doing, I ordered it from Amazon. And just hearing you say, there's nothing wrong with me, like it's a habit. And that's when I felt like the weight was just lifted. I was like, yes, exactly. Like that's what it was. Like it's not like I have to go from doctor to doctor and prescription to prescription. Like it's a habit. It's something that I trained myself to do to try and deal with these uncomfortable feelings that I had as a child, that I has had as an adult. So through that, I'm back into now the cycle of coming out of it and learning and living to my highest brain and being my best self.
It's super inspiring to hear you say that. I mean, so as you're like coming out of it, can you talk about sort of what your experience has been as far as the urges, and are you still experiencing those urges, and how are you able to like dismiss them and just keep living as your highest self?
Sure. Yeah. The urges, yeah, they still come, but I feel like now like the pressure's off. Like there's nothing wrong with me. It's a habit. And now that I can label it as a habit, it helps me gain control and feel like I'm more in control. I just feel like, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do something healthier, something that will sustain me to where I want to be. I want to get out of this pit of not liking myself and not living because it's time away from my daughter, it's time away from my family, away from my friends, and I've already wasted too much time feeling yucky. So I just keep that bigger picture in mind, and again, just knowing like it's just a habit you can break.
For sure. It seems like you're able to really connect with who you are and just live as that person and just disregard sort of these old tapes that are playing in your head or these old urges that are coming up just based on what you've taught your brain. Do you find that the urges are getting less?
I do. Yeah, they definitely get less. And your voice, the voice from your higher self gets stronger. But it's definitely a process. I mean, trust me, I've been doing this for like 40 some years now, and it's a process, but you have to love yourself and you have to be kind and you have to know that when you're talking badly about yourself, you're talking badly about yourself now, but also as that little person who learned to deal with an uncomfortable feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And they did it with food. And, it's like there's worse things. People can turn to all sorts of things.
Yeah, I find that really interesting. And I'm wondering if you'll explore that a little bit as far as the connection between the emotions and the binging, because it seemed like that was kind of how it started. Your life was really hard as a child. There was some trauma there, and food made you feel good temporarily. So you develop that connection. And as you know, in my book, it's like to try to separate those emotional issues from the binging. But with your kind of having a strong connection there, like if you have a strong emotion, maybe you have more urges. Like, how were you able to still deal with the emotions, but then also break the habit?
Yeah, I definitely learned from an early age and from watching my mother do it that, the binging brought feelings of happiness, whether it be control or whatever, like I would watch my mom do it and then she'd be in a better mood. And so, and then I did it more. But as an adult, I feel like the emotions are always there, but just knowing that like you've got this, like I said, just to be kind to myself, like one of the things in your book that made me so sad is hearing the way you spoke to yourself. I wouldn't want to say that to anyone, but it's like, okay, but wait, I do that too. Other people do that too, and it's like, again, it's like, stop, take a breath, take a break. Trust me, I know it's easier said than done, but have some compassion and some trust. And it's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to happen. You just have to keep going. And I don't know if I'm necessarily out of it completely, but I definitely have a better handle on it. I definitely feel more control, and I feel like I'm definitely getting to the life that I want to be. And I just keep that goal in mind. And that's what keeps me forward. And that's what helps me break that habit when I feel the urge.
Yeah. And it hasn't really been that long since you read my book, right? Was it like last year sometime?
It was. Yeah. It was, I think it was last spring that I read it. And then I reread it. And then I read it again.
Yeah. It seems like you're really seeing that the binging isn't doing anything for you. Even if you had connected it with emotions in the past and it gave you some temporary emotional relief or comfort, that's not really the case anymore, in that you realize there are other solutions that don't harm you, that help you actually become the person you want to be instead of falling back into those old destructive behaviors.
Right, exactly. And during the years where I was living my best self, I was really into yoga and I was into running and I was into nature. And I think part of the reason why, I got so wrapped up in the binging cycle is because I stopped doing the things that I enjoyed. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really easy. I feel crappy. I go to the fridge, and then I'm in this state of, being like comatose almost and not wanting to move. And it's definitely easier, but feeling like I have more control, and it gives me a better sense of happiness. And I'm getting back to those things that I want to do, things like the yoga and running, and even just like walking, being in nature, spending time with the people I love. It makes me realize that you don't have to do the food, even just writing or drawing or just something other than doing something that is not going to help you be your best self.
Yeah. And I think it'll help everyone listening to realize that just because you develop certain patterns in childhood doesn't mean you have to keep those patterns going like in your future.
Right. Yep. Exactly. And that was really big for me because, they're a part of me. And it is actually generational, but I just stopped and I had to make a conscious decision. Is this going to help me? Is this the life that I want? Is this the life that I want my daughter to see? Mm-hmm. And the answer was no. And it was a strong no. And I'm like, all right, let's do this.
And it takes a lot of courage. And for my own story, I know it has like limitations because I didn't have that trauma sort of in my background. And it was really the dieting that started the whole cycle. So did you feel like the trauma was something you had to address to get to sort of a healthy place where you could stand up as your highest self and really want to recover? I think trauma sometimes can make people not really want to recover and not be able to capture that part of themselves that wants better for themselves. How do you feel like in your own story that the trauma factored into your eventual recovery, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And that's a great question. The trauma, yeah, I definitely processed it throughout my life. Still in ways I process it now. But I think living for someone outside of myself, I have two younger brothers that I'm really close with. And so when I was younger, it was living for them, and then I started to live for me. And, now not only am I living for me, but I'm living for my daughter. And so trauma is hard. It's definitely there's so much that goes into it, but I feel like that could be just an excuse though, for why you do something unhealthy. And I think just recognizing that, it happened and it was really sucky when it happened, but I try not to go through it again and just to kind of let it go and keep positive about the future, and make it bright. It's like, where is it that I want to go? What is it that I want to teach my daughter and my family? And so I just kind of always keep that in the forefront of my mind. And that helps me, go for it. And so, sometimes it's step by step. Some days are better than other, but just trying to keep positive and know that, the trauma that I experienced, okay, well, it was stinky and I dealt with it by binging and exercising and all that kind of stuff. It's long gone. And so now it's up to me and my life and to make the best of it.
Wow. It's super helpful, I feel like, for people to hear. And, I know everyone's just listening to the audio, but you have such an amazing smile and you can just see the positivity like coming out in your face. And you're just, I think you're right when you said that it can become an excuse at some point. It seems like you did a lot of work to deal with it. And even doing that work, I find that some people I talk to, they do all this work on trauma and they still have the binge urges. Like the urges are still there because it is a habit. So the fact that you're able to recognize this, you had this much better mindset around the trauma, but you still had the urges and realize that, okay, that's what I need to work on, changing this habit, rewiring my brain. Yeah, I think that's amazing.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the compliment. But I have to say, Catherine, your book was the first time I actually heard it labeled as a habit and not something that was wrong with me. And that's what I was searching for all my life. What is wrong with me? And depending on who you asked, they give a whole litany of things.
Yeah.
But hearing you say, there's nothing wrong with you. It's a habit. It's how you're choosing to deal with things and how to act. And that was like hitting it on the head for me. And that allowed me then to move forward and to just remember that I'm in control. I picked up this habit from an early age and it helped. And at the time, it's what I needed to do. But I'm not there anymore. I'm not that person anymore. So, now it's just, moving forward and just trying to do the best that we can.
Yeah. Even if at one point the habit was related to coping, it's still a habit. It's just those are the triggers that kind of led to the urges that develop this pattern in your brain, and it can still be undone.
Right, exactly. And it definitely was a way for me to cope all the way from being a child to being, an adult. And, and even now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed. Let me eat something, but it's just taking a step back and remembering no, I don't have to. I'm feeling stressed. I could go for a walk. I could just sit, I can breathe. And, for the longest time, I just had little lists all around my house of what I can do instead of eating, things that I enjoy doing. And so, that was really helpful as well to keep it front and center until a new habit was solidified in my brain, something that didn't include binging or doing something that was unhealthy.
Yeah, for sure. I also want to ask, we'll wrap up here in a few minutes, but I just want to ask about the eating adequately part of recovery. How has that been for you as far as, making sure you're eating enough, you're not falling into dieting or that old restrictive mindset?
Yeah, that is, It's definitely something that I'm trying to learn. I've realized that I felt my best when I just was mindful about what I was eating. And I've been eating a ton more of vegetables and just things that are good for me. And again, I just say to myself, is this going to help me? Like I've been able to realize things like processed food and things with less of sugar, like how they make me feel. I don't feel good, and I don't want to not feel good. I want to feel great. I want to have energy. I just try to, what is healthy? What is it that my body needs? Like I try to eat vegan a lot of times, but then, I'll just be like feeling like I really need, a steak. And so I'll have that steak, but not restricting myself and just keeping like better choices in the house.
That's great. It sounds like you're really getting in tune with your body and learning what works for you. And for people who maybe have had this since childhood, you can feel out of touch with your body, especially if you've spent years not listening to it by dieting, by binging. So just hearing your process of getting back in touch with your body, I think is great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been so helpful, and I think as we get older, it's easier to tune it out, but our body knows what it needs. We know what we need to do, but so many things come up and it's hard to listen to it. So, being mindful and meditating has definitely helped to make that inner voice stronger.
That's great. Just to wrap up, what is, something you would say to the people out there listening who are still really stuck in the cycle and struggling with the binging?
I would say you can do this, and to be gentle with yourself. It's a process. And like I said earlier, like when you're saying mean things to yourself, not only are you saying them to the person you are now, but you're saying them to the person that you were, maybe even the child that you were, like me when I started. But that's not going to do anything. That's not going to help you in any way. So love yourself, love where you are right now, and just take it step by step.
Thank you so much, Joanne. It's been super helpful, and I know the listeners also find it beneficial to hear your story. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I really appreciate meeting you and doing this. It's been an honor. Thank you. You've helped me so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That means a lot. Okay, today we have Laurence here to talk about her recovery, and I'm so glad to have you.
Well, thank you. As I told you earlier, you're kind of my heroine. I owe you my second life.
That's amazing to hear. And I know the listeners are going to benefit from what you share because you struggled for a long time with this. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. Yes. I struggled. I always say more than 30 years, but when I look back, I think I'm already in my teenage years. So when I was 12, 13, I was already struggling with the weight cycling and having urges to binge. So it's actually more 37, 38 years probably.
And did it start with you going on a diet?
Well, in retrospect, I can say that my mom had also a binge eating disorder, and that I kind of modeled things on her. She was always on a diet and then falling off the wagon, and then we would dive together in the cookie box without my father knowing anything. So there was a lot of secrecy. So I learned also that, good stuff you would eat is something you have to be ashamed of eating. Mm-hmm. And so you eat that in secret. And I learned kind of with her that you should be on a diet, and then it wouldn't be possible anymore to be on a diet. Then you would go into the cookie box, let's say. Mm-hmm. So it started like that, probably modeling on her. And also I heard all of my life comments from her as well that I should, keep off the weight, that I should really control my food. These are stuff I learned from her. And, as a teenager, I wanted to be attractive. I wanted to have a boyfriend. Mm-hmm. And so I started to diet. And with the diet came also the urges to binge.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's like you learn from a young age that you should be on a diet. You should be trying to control your weight, but then also that you need to break the diet. And it makes sense that the body is deprived and you would be going off that diet. And it makes sense that your mother did as well. I feel like it's just so unrealistic to expect to be able to stick to diets. And so many children learn that in a very early age, that dieting is what you should be doing. And it's just the complete opposite of what is actually helpful in order to maintain a healthy weight.
Yes, absolutely. I can only agree with you. You have really to nourish your body, and especially as a teenage girl also, well, you have to deal with all these changes in your body, and it's sometimes difficult to deal with that. And you look at your friends, and if everybody is in the diet mode, let's say, then you kind of think like, okay, this is the way, I should probably do it as well. And I need to have this thinner body to be attractive, to be popular. So it was really the starting point of all my problems, because it only got worse with the years.
Yeah. And you almost think it's a healthy thing to do, especially if you're doing it because, let's say, your mother's doing it, or your friends are doing it. And so many people are dieting. We don't know who's going to end up with an eating disorder. And you don't know you're susceptible until it starts. And dieting, is not good for anyone. But, I didn't know I was susceptible to an eating disorder. You didn't know you were susceptible. So when did you sort of know, okay, I have a problem?
Well, I knew for a long time I had a problem. Only at that time it had no name. We had heard about anorexia, a little bit about bulimia, but binge eating disorder, that was something I really heard for the first time when I was like 30, because before that, maybe I was in denial also myself. I was like, okay, probably I'm the only one in the world who cannot stick to her diet. And so I would blame myself, not the diet. I would blame myself for not being able to stick to the diet and to have these urges to binge, which would just, be kind of coming from nowhere. And I couldn't understand. And in a bizarre way, I didn't make the link between the dieting and those urges to binge. So I think I tried everything, every single diet I tried. And at some point I had also a gastric band, because I thought like, okay, this is going to solve my weight issue. But then I lost massive weight with the gastric band, and then I regained all the weight. And that's the moment I was like, okay, so this problem of mine, it's not only a physical thing, maybe it's psychological or anything, and I should see really a doctor or a psychologist. And then I heard for the first time about binge eating disorder. And by the time I was like 32 or something like that. And that was really the moment I was thinking like, oh, okay, so there's a name on this, and it's more maybe a psychological issue. But then I went to therapy, and I think I did something like 8 years of therapy, but it didn't bring me nowhere, because, I tried my best to work on my emotions, on becoming the better version of myself, and trying, to cope with my stress and everything of my life. And in the end, it only helped me to get rid of the urges to binge for a few months. But after that, I would fall back into the habit. And it was so frustrating, and I didn't understand why until you came into my life.
And how did that happen? Did you find my book?
Well, I did that at a very late age, because I was 50 when I decided, okay, do I really want to spend the next 50 years of my life dealing with this issue? And I was like, no, no, it's enough. And I decided to, just like a detective, to find something different from what I had already done, because I had done lots of stuff, also alternative practices and everything, acupuncture and hypnosis and everything. And that also not brought the results I had expected. So I just kind of used my network and asked everybody, okay, what do you know that is currently new on the field of binge eating? And I got some very nice answers from Canada and the US, because at the time I had a kind of international career. And they told me about, not your book, but I started with the book of Jeffrey Schwartz, Brain Lock. It was about obsessive compulsive disorders. And I kind of had a aha moment, because I was like, okay, so this urge I feel, it's basically the same urge as someone who washes her or his hands 1,000 times a day. It's a feeling inside of you of restlessness that compels you to do something while you don't want to do that something. And so I understood the philosophy. I understood how the brain worked. And at some point, I saw a video of Jeffrey Schwartz, and there was a comment underneath the video. I think it was on YouTube or something. And there was someone saying, thanks to this video, I made a link with food also with the book Brain Over Binge by Catherine Hansen. And I was like, oh, okay, the link with food. Okay, interesting. So I went straight to your book, which is here. And oh my God, this book changed my life because I was able then to understand what Jeffrey Schwartz had said and written and apply it to my problem, because you kind of converted all this brain science, basically neuroscience, into this relationship with food, and explained very clearly the link between dieting and habit, the creation of habits, and how it all is about conditioning and how you can eventually reprogram your brain. And yeah, this insight only, that is what changed my life.
It's so interesting that you found me through Jeffrey Schwartz, because as you know, I quote him a lot in my book. Both of my books. That was a huge aha moment for me, finding his work, because I had read Jack Trimpey's Rational Recovery, which really allowed me just to take control right away and to stop binging. But I didn't know why. I didn't understand. So digging into it, kind of as you did, trying to find what I could, being a detective, when I found Jeffrey Schwartz's work on neuroplasticity and OCD and extinguishing habits, it's like, wow, oh my gosh, I rewired my brain. And from that, really my books were kind of born. So I love that you found me through him.
Yeah. And I must say, at first, when I read your book, I was like, well, this insight is absolutely great. But if it was that simple to reprogram our brain, nobody ever would have binges. So is it maybe too good to be true? I really had this kind of thought, and so for a while I left it on my night cupboard. And then, because nothing changed, I was like, okay, no, I need to go further with the book and try to apply what Catherine says. And it was tough at first, because there were lots of limiting beliefs, because I had been for so long into the binge eating disorder that I was like, I'm not sure if I can ever recover. I'm not sure if it's meant for me to recover. And I wanted to do things perfect. And then when I had a day when I had a binge in the end, I was like, oh, you see, it doesn't work, leave it. But my mindset was very low. So I really had to work on my mindset in the end to be able to apply the 5 components.
I think that's very helpful for you to say to everyone listening, because I do think, any sort of recovery information that resonates with them, but then not be able to apply it and feel like, oh, something's wrong with me, or maybe something's wrong with the approach, and keep jumping around from approach to approach and nothing really ever works. And you think, oh, I'm just broken. Can you kind of say more about how you were able to shift your mindset to start believing that it was possible?
Well, I think that's what Julie is doing at the moment, basically, because in that period, I was a solo entrepreneur. I had my own company in copywriting, marketing, and I had a business coach. And she used to say, your company will not grow as much as you as a person also grow. And she said, I don't know, there is some impediment in you. You are just keeping yourself small, and I don't understand why. And so we started to talk, and I eventually talked to her about my eating disorder. And she was like, now I understand. And so I talked to her about the book, and that I had difficulty putting everything into practice. And then she said, okay, so let's talk about mindset. And she gave me some clues to work on my mindset. She made me do a very important practice, which is simply to take a picture of me as a child and to say to that child all the ugly things I would say to myself, all the limiting beliefs I had also for myself, I held for myself. And then it was really very dramatic, because I was like, oh, I would never say that to a child and to my younger self. And then she said, yeah, but basically that's what you're doing all the time. You keep yourself small, and you have all this critical stuff you say to yourself the whole time, and not empowering yourself. And if you realize that you wouldn't say these words to a child, you would not speak that out, don't do it to yourself. And so this picture of me as a child, she's my companion. She's my buddy. She's been my buddy on my way to recovery, because every time I had such a thought, I would look at that photograph and I would say to myself, oh, no, I wouldn't say that to her. So I just stopped saying that to me. And so this really helped me to do the stuff I needed to do. And when I felt the urges to binge and that I was so critical and that I would not be able to practice one or the other step and stay, for me, the core thing is to stay emotionally neutral when the urge is there, seeing it as neurological junk, which I changed into bug because it was easier to say in Dutch. Then I would take that picture and that would help me so much to stay calm and focused on my goal to recover.
That's really powerful to treat yourself as an adult the way you would treat a child that you love or care about, or yourself as a child. I love that.
Yeah. So in the end, I recovered and actually rather quickly, because once I decided for myself to really, every time that an urge to binge would come, to go through the 5 components in 3 months' time, I was recovered.
That's great. And so that is the dismissing the urges piece of recovery, you know, having those urges, not acting on them. What about the other piece of recovery, the eating adequately part? Because you struggle with dieting. So was it a challenge to give up dieting?
No, because I was 50 and I was like, okay, dieting has brought me nowhere. Yeah. So that I can leave. That's not a problem. It was more of a challenge to go back to what is normal eating, because I think in my life, maybe as a baby, I did eat normally, but I had no recollection of that. And so it was a challenge to find a way to eat normally again. How much is normal? Is it okay to eat often the same, or should I vary more? Or, you know, all kinds of silly questions. And also my former binge food, should I reintroduce that? And how do I reintroduce that? And all the fears, still the fears around that, and not being able to leave it just one cookie without having the whole package, you know, that kind of stuff. That was really difficult. That was a challenge. Nourishing myself enough was okay during meal times, but finding, you know, is overeating normal? Is having a dessert normal? I think it took another year before I could figure out approximately what was normal for me, what was enough for me, and also to reconnect to my bodily signals, because basically I was in my head. I was living in my head. I was not in my body.
Yeah, that's useful, because you seem to have stopped binging, but then it took you a while to sort out sort of how you need to be eating. And I think sometimes when people get into those questions about what is normal, what's normal for me, they feel like they may have failed. They feel like they're not doing it right. Then they think, oh, I should just go back to binging. And I love that that's not what you did. You just kept moving forward to improve your eating, to find a way that worked for you. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you feel like today you are at peace with food. I mean, I know you wrote that in your recovery story that was in the Brain Over Binge 2nd edition. So explain what that's like as far as, you know, having that peace with food today.
Yeah, well, you know, you're saying that I just kept going. Of course, I kept going because I had the result. The binges had stopped, which was already, whoa, mind blowing. Yeah, it was amazing. I you know, still today, it's my biggest victory ever, because I felt like, you know, I had climbed Mount Everest. I had not held possible that it would happen one day. So from that on, it became easier, because I trusted also your words. And you said in the book that it will calm down, you will find a way, so keep just going. And you gave me a lot of trust in the end. And that trust, I'm really thankful for that, kept me going. Now, how does it look like? Well, as you see, I'm not the thinnest girl of the world, and I don't care, frankly. Because I have a life to live, and I'm no longer in the food thoughts and in all this stuff around my weight, etc. My focus is again on what is truly important in my life, what matters in my life. And so that's the big change. And I'm very present in my eating moments. I make sure that the light is on immediately in my brain when I put something into my mouth, that I check, okay, am I hungry and am I getting slowly full? Is my stomach getting slowly filled up? How much pleasure do I take in this food? Because if I have no pleasure, what's the point? And I make sure that every meal is really a feast, a party. And in the past, maybe a meal could only be really festive when it was high in calorie, full sugar and fat, etc. And nowadays it's not. My taste has really normalized and I can really taste, let's say. So that's really a change. Sometimes I overeat because it's really very, very delicious. And for the rest, I just see it a day at a time, a meal at a time, and I'm not concerned about yesterday, about tomorrow. I plan a bit and I plan a lot, not. And eating has become really, as now, the right place into my mind and life. It's nice. I like eating, but it's not that important anymore. And that's really the big difference.
That's great. I love that you are enjoying your food too, because I think, like you just said, the only time you really felt like you could take pleasure in food was when you were breaking your diet. So I love that you found enjoyment, pleasure, satisfaction in normal eating. And of course, we should like to eat. That's what, it helps us survive, and it's okay to like to eat. But like you said, it's in its proper place. You eat and then you get back to living.
Yeah, absolutely. And I come from a country, because I live in the Netherlands, but I come from Belgium. And in Belgium, we love food. There's a big emphasis on food. So that's part of my culture. And I don't want to renounce that. Yeah. It's okay, to enjoy food. It's not because you get back to normal eating that it shouldn't be pleasurable. You are allowed to have pleasure with food.
Absolutely. How has your life improved? And that'll sort of be my last question to wrap up here. What's different about your life now without that struggle?
Well, I believe that for the first time of my life, I'm really enjoying the small things in life. I'm able to really, I'm at peace. That's the big thing. I'm really at peace. And when I remember, my focus, my attention was always on weight and on eating and all the preoccupations around all of that. And there are periods in my life when I felt really depressed about all that. And also with putting on weight and I'm now at a weight which is regulating itself. I don't need to do anything, which is really also very awesome. My body and my brain are working together to keep me in a certain range, which is the range that belongs to me, apparently. And that's fine, And so, for example, I went through menopause, in the last 2 years, and I didn't really experience lots of the nasty stuff that they tell you about. It was really, I put a little bit on weight. I noticed that, but I calmed down myself. I said, okay, well, my body needs to do that apparently. So, and now I'm in the process of releasing that overweight, let's say, again. So it's like, it's just staying in the range. And I like that because, I don't need to worry about that. And I can focus on the things which are really important into my life, my family, my friends, my work, which is great, especially because the method you have brought into the world is light and simple, while therapy is often painful and long and hard. And I have also a lot of time to spend with myself, and that I didn't allow me in the past. Choosing things that really warm up my soul, I would say. And there was no time for that before, because it was all about appearance, how I would look, the exterior. There was no attention for the inside.
Yeah, giving up the eating disorder, giving up that struggle, it just gives you so much back, and you can go deeper in your life. It's not just all about appearance. It's not all about, what did I eat today? You can really discover what uniquely nourishes you, what uniquely fills you up. That has nothing to do with food and weight. And I love that you've found that in your life. And it doesn't mean life is going to be perfect. I'm sure you have your share of problems, and I'm sure,
of course.
But now you have choices about how to deal with those. You don't feel so constantly trapped by just turning to food over and over again. So are there sort of any final thoughts you'd like to share with people who are still struggling with this?
Well, I would say keep the faith for you that you can absolutely recover from binge eating. That's the most important thing. And we need to really empower our children as well to deal with all these damaging messages from society, and make sure your eating disorder ends up with you and that you empower from that place your children to protect them from all these damaging stuff coming from society.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And we have such an opportunity. A lot of us who came from a family who focused on weight, who focused on dieting. Gosh, there's so many of us now, like we're raising kids and we get the opportunity to not have them go through that same thing, to model good behaviors, to not model as your mother did. And I'm sure she was well-meaning and didn't know that it was going to lead to this issue for you. To not model dieting, to not model like breaking your diet behaviors, to just nourish yourself and take care of yourself and accept yourself. And like you said, trust yourself, trust your weight, that everyone has a set range. And
yes, all bodies are okay. And we have to nourish our bodies, and we have also to nourish our minds. And then, leave all these stuff from the diet industry and also from the, there's so much stuff to discuss there, Catherine.
Yes, I feel like we could talk for so long. You've been so helpful, and I love that you're giving back and helping others. And I really appreciate you sharing your story here on the podcast, and then also in the second edition of Brain Over Binge. It's been amazing talking to you today, Laurence.
Thank you for being there, Catherine, because you meant a lot for me. And as I said, I'm really a huge supporter of you. And I was so glad. I'm really thankful that we did this podcast together.
I'm so thankful too. That means so much to me to know that my work has made a difference in your life. So thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
So today Eileen is here to share her story. Hi, Eileen.
Hi, Catherine.
It's so good to have you here. We talked for a minute before the show, and you just said that you're here because you just hope to help one person. And by sharing your story, you can just, say something that may resonate with someone else. So that's amazing.
Yeah, I do hope and think that my story will help somebody. Yours certainly did. And the other recovery stories have helped me. I've been listening on the podcast. It's great. It's good to be here.
So glad to have you as a part of this series. It seems like this problem started for you as a teenager. Is that correct?
It did, yes.
Was it with dieting?
It was. I went on my first diet. I think I was 14 or 15, and I had braces at the time. And I stopped eating easily because I had to brush my teeth and didn't want to get food in my braces anymore in the evening. But what I remember most about that diet, that first diet, was that I got some positive comments from my mother, and she was not quick to give us any kind of compliments. So I kind of remember feeling like, oh, I've done something good. So that was the first diet, which really seemed kind of harmless. But later I started dieting when I was first dating in high school, and there was a lot of confusion about being with boys. And I went to an all-girls Catholic high school, and I think I was just unprepared to accept what boys wanted during dating. And so I would, on one hand, want to look attractive and be desired, because that for me and a lot of the women I know was kind of like, that was what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to look good and be thin. So once I saw that boys started giving me attention, I think I was 17 or something. On one hand, I was happy about that. On the other hand, it was confusing because I wasn't ready to be sexually active, and just a lot of confusion, not really having anyone to talk to, but always trying to look my best. And what happened was, I feel that I remember specifically one night coming home and being so confused about being with this gentleman and just needing to talk to someone, but not feeling there was anyone to talk to. My parents were kind of hard to talk to. So my mom had made this rice stroganoff dish that I loved, and I sat down and ate a bunch of it. And of course, the brain or whatever learned a lot from your book of what the messages were. At this point, I didn't know, but I remember feeling good, like, oh, that's a relief. But wanting to control the weight and look good, I started to restrict. Again, with the relationship with my mom, it was kind of like she would make dinners for 4 of us. This is my younger sister, my mom and dad, but it was enough for 6 to 8 people. So one of the things I think in my head to gain kind of control over, again, looking good, feeling good, but also kind of rebelling against my mom, I feel now, I look back, was to have control over my eating. So that was one thing. I remember feeling kind of empowered about that. But the more I restricted, I felt worse as far as like feeling faint and not being healthy. I was underweight at that point. My aunt saw me and I went down to visit them because I was obsessed with the scale. And she said to my mom, oh my God, Eileen's ribs are showing. I was too thin. I was anorexic. So my parents told me, we're going to make you go to the hospital if you don't start eating. And it wasn't like, we're going to get you some help. It was more like, we're going to send you to jail or something. It was how I felt. So that's when I learned how to binge, and I used laxatives. I could never throw up. So I started abusing laxatives. By this point, I'm late teens, early 20s. So I abused laxatives for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was hell. That I was stuck in hell.
Yeah.
Horrible to my body and just ashamed. At one point in my teens, I didn't have my period for like 3 months.
Okay.
I was just so not alive. I wasn't experiencing family trips, my family that would come to visit. I just wasn't alive. I was stuck in my obsession.
Yeah, I'm sure so many people can relate to that. It's going on that first diet so innocently. Yep. I mean, so many of us did that. It's like, oh, people seem to think I'm doing a good thing when I diet and when I lose weight. So why not continue? And it seems so innocent at the time. And it's reinforced by cultural messages, like you said, by your mother. And that's like, it kind of makes it stick. But then little do we know, it's creating havoc in the body and brain. And gosh, yeah.
And what I felt was control in the beginning with restricting became so out of control.
It leaves you susceptible, I think, to that sort of stress-induced overeating. Like what you described to me, it was like you came home from this being with a boy and you were so confused and stressed and emotional, and like there's food. Of course, like your body's starving. You have all this stress. Like you're going to want pleasure. You're going to want food.
Yes.
I mean, it just sets you up for that. That's been shown in animal studies of animals that are, put through a period of food deprivation and then exposed to stress, and they'll eat. And it only makes sense. But when you're in it, like, what is happening to me?
And that study, the Minnesota
there's that too.
And then when I look at these calories that they put these people on the studies, I'm like, wow, I was eating so much less than that.
So for the listeners who aren't familiar with it, it's the Minnesota starvation experiment. I talked about it in my book. You can find information on it online. It's really the only large scale study that studied the effects of starvation on humans, because for ethical reasons, we can't really repeat that. It was for the purposes of learning how to refeed people after a period of starvation, like in war. Yeah. And they were only like 1,500 calories or something like that. I may be getting the exact numbers wrong, but yeah, I was eating way less than that.
I had periods of time after I moved out from my parents where I didn't binge. And that kind of shocked me. This is fast forwarding to my late 20s. I was in love with this gentleman after my first divorce and moved back to San Francisco. And I was just really enjoying the city and partying and being in love with this guy and really paying attention to him. And it was about a 2-year period. I had no lower brain messages to binge. And it shocked me. I'm like, how did that happen? And it only shocked me later because I just focused on something else. And I realize now that there are periods again after that relationship didn't work. I'm on my second marriage. I've been married for 20 years in August, my second husband, where I still get caught up in the binging. So I was like, wow, how did that happen? Like I was so obsessed with this man. And then what I feel is when I'm comfortable again, or I'm in a happy marriage, then I go back to listening to the urges again and on and off with the dieting. And I got into a 12-step program, Food Addicts Anonymous. And that we were only eating 1,200 calories, back to the calories again.
Wow.
However, it was whole foods, 3 meals a day, no snacks, no binge foods, right? I didn't feel like I was starving, but at the same time, I was definitely restricting. And again, Catherine, what I feel all this time up until I'm 58 now is that I still buy into the diet mentality because I have been so conditioned to believe that diets are the only way to be skinny and be desirable. And I'm 58. I'm no longer feeling like I need to be desirable to the opposite sex or even other women. But you know what I mean? Like, oh, we have to all look good. But at the same time, I want to be thinner. I want to be healthier, but I still get caught up in the dieting. And just recently with your second edition, I really came to the realization that, Eileen, diets do not work.
Yeah.
No matter what, they will set me up to listen to the lower brain starts going.
Yeah.
You know?
It's deceptive because it does seem for a lot of people that first diet, quote unquote, works. Like I've heard something along the lines of, oh, you get one diet, basically, meaning it may be, quote, successful the first time in that you'll lose weight because your metabolism is healthy and things like that, but it doesn't take long until you start to have consequences. So you look back at that first dieting experience and think, oh, it worked. Well, no, it didn't. It just, made you lose weight for a short period of time, which led to a lot of consequences. But when you perpetuate dieting, it slows metabolism. It just makes it so much harder to maintain your healthy weight. What progress have you made there as far as like accepting your weight and just really learning to deal with that?
Well, just in the last couple months, like through the pandemic, I was cooking, and there's this big wave of plant-based diets. So I was cooking red lentil chili and lots of carbs, and I think I was eating too many calories. So I was gaining weight and just being really confused. Well, this is supposed to be a weight loss diet. And so what I've learned is, like, just in the last few months, that I can intuitively eat. I have tried, quote unquote, to eat intuitively where I'm hungry and stop when I'm full. And I've always been tripping myself up on that. So in the last couple of months, I just really said to myself, this is ridiculous. I don't want to overeat. I'm not binging, but I'm stuck in this dieting mentality again. And so for the first time, I really feel free from dieting. And again, with the intuitive eating, sometimes with my perfectionist tendencies, I know a lot of us have that. I want to be a perfect intuitive eater, and I don't think it's about that.
Yeah.
I listen to you and other women that have overcome this, and I just think to myself, well, you guys have managed to intuitively eat, and I just don't know if I'll ever be able to do that. It's like, the main thing is I don't want to binge and overeat. I don't have to be a perfect intuitive eater. Like today, I took a walk. I came back and I was hungry, and I thought, well, I'm going to do the interview, so I'm going to have something to eat. And it wasn't a big deal. I just ate something and came up here to the room to do the interview. It's kind of like when I was with that man that I was obsessed with. I have other things to focus on, and life is just so precious and short. And I'm feeling like I'm getting there. And it's been wonderful because I just don't want to diet anymore. It feels better not to worry about the perfect intuitive eating diet, the perfect this diet, the perfect that diet does not exist. So just taking care of myself. I've been walking slow and steady. Well, I think what you guys talk about is what my point was, is that you kind of found your normal weight for yourself. And I really need to trust that. And I think if I can help somebody who's listening, is just to trust that my body will find its weight that's healthy for me. It may not look like that skinny girl I was in my 20s or whatever, but that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That your body is going to heal. It's going to find the weight that it wants to be right now. And it takes a while for the effects of dieting to kind of go away, because you've starved yourself and you've binged, and it takes a while for the body just to get the message that, okay, we don't need to store up food. We don't need to, basically the body can relax and just, you can eat. I think it's great that you're trusting that process.
Yeah. And it's only been since May. I have not binged. I have not really overeaten. And I'm trusting the process. And I tried on these pair of pants. They were a little snug, and it's like, oh, the brain wanted to freak out. And what? How can you possibly wear that size? And blah, blah, blah. I threw away my scale in May too. And it's okay. I'm not going to panic. It's just a day that it was a little snug in those pants. It's not about the fear that I'm going to suddenly wake up and be 15, 20 pounds heavier. It's not going to work that way, because I'm just eating what's right for me, and the body will not allow that to happen. I just have trust in that now, and I'm not panicking. I'm going to my cousin's daughter's wedding, and it's going to be a little bit scary in the way that I haven't been this heavy in my family. The whole family's going to be there, and it's, you know what? I don't think they're going to care. I think they're just going to be happy to see me, and that alone is huge for me.
Yeah, that is super inspiring, because I think that fear of, what's going to happen to my weight, it keeps people stuck in the cycle. It keeps people stuck in dieting and binging, which is so miserable. Like, yeah, I think it's great that you're taking control. And like, how did my sort of approach factor into this? When did you find Brain Over Binge? I know you said you found it kind of a while back.
Yes. So I was in that 12-step program, and I couldn't sustain not eating any flour or sugar or snacks. So I got really discouraged and went out of that program, and I found your book, I think 2012, and just started realizing that it was a bad habit that I'd had all these years, and that restricting again was only going to make those urges come back, and that nothing was really wrong with me. that I wasn't this sick, powerless person that's going to have this disease for the rest of my life. I swear, it was so refreshing to read your book and realize I'm not stuck in this for the rest of my life. It's not a disease. I just really was misunderstanding what was going on when I was a teenager. And so many people suffer with this habit. And there's so many other habits and problems I have that I see that it's the same kind of thing. I'm just like believing that I don't have the will to stop this. But so it was really refreshing reading your book. And then you said you read Rational Recovery. So I got that book too. And it just made so much sense because those 12-step programs, a lot of my friends and my family members don't want to go into the, real religious part of it. You don't have to go that route. It was I love that junk mail. It's like, so it started helping me. It's like, oh, there's some junk mail. It's like, you need to do this. You need to do that. You need to go on Nutrisystem. You need to do it. It's like, do I?
Yeah, you don't have to go down that path anymore. So you found the book, but then do you feel like you couldn't let go of the dieting until now? Okay.
Yes, that was it. So I found the book. I'm all free. For a while I was like just high on the fact that I understood what was going on. And then I feel like, oh, I can't do it. I can't be like Catherine. And the reason why was because I still wanted to find the perfect diet.
Yeah.
I could not let go of that. And that was just something